3 days before my major surgery, I thought I understood what it meant to endure quietly without breaking. I believed that staying calm would protect the last fragile thread connecting me to the people I still called family. My name is Kayla Simmons. I am 28 years old, and that week was supposed to be about surviving a medical operation that could change my future. It started with a message that froze my hands. My sister texted in the family group chat. "The wedding will be held this weekend. It cannot be changed." I stared at the screen slowly because that weekend was not just any weekend. It was the exact day written on my hospital paperwork. The date my surgeon had circled twice. The date I was supposed to be under anesthesia while my body was being cut open to fix something that had been getting worse for months. I called my mother hoping she would hesitate even for a second. "We already promised we would be at your sister's wedding," she said without lowering her voice. I heard my father in the background before he even picked up the phone. "Your surgery can wait. A wedding happens once in a lifetime." Those words landed heavier than the diagnosis. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not beg. I said only what they expected me to say. "I understand." My boyfriend sat beside me the entire time, never interrupting, never trying to speak for me, only holding my hand when my fingers started to shake, staying close in the quiet way I had never received from my own family. Before I continue, I want to ask you to take 1 second to subscribe. Stay with this story until the end because what happened after that message shocked even the people who thought they knew me best. And the truth behind that wedding weekend changed everything. Years ago, my family lived by quiet routines where everyone seemed to understand their place except me because my place was never spoken out loud, only assumed, only expected, never questioned. The first time I understood how different things were happened when my sister Brianna was always treated as the center of important decisions. Whenever choices were made, everything revolved around what made her comfortable, what protected her feelings, what made her life easier, while my needs were treated as secondary details that could be adjusted or ignored without real consequence. I started working very young, not because anyone asked me to, but because the pressure of watching everything fall apart felt heavier than the work itself. I quietly handled household bills, set reminders for utility payments, filled out insurance paperwork, listened to conversations about money without ever being part of the final decisions because everyone assumed I would fix problems without needing to be seen. Brianna never managed to keep a stable job for long, and Mom always found a reason to explain it away as temporary, misunderstood, unlucky, or caused by people who failed to appreciate her. Whenever she needed help, the entire house seemed to shift to make room for her problems. While my struggles stayed hidden behind routines that kept the family functioning, there were long periods when she lived without any consistent income. Yet the lifestyle she expected never changed because I quietly paid for parts of it without anyone needing to ask twice. I covered rent when she moved, handled basic insurance expenses when she could not manage them, paid for groceries when Mom said money was tight, and carried the pressure without expecting thanks because gratitude was never part of the agreement. Mom loved to talk about family unity, but unity usually meant I was the one who stepped back during conflict, the one who softened difficult conversations, the one who gave more, so the atmosphere stayed calm. Dad rarely asked how I was holding up, but he often reminded me that family survived only when someone was willing to sacrifice, and those words slowly shaped how I saw my own worth. Over time, no one needed to tell me what was expected anymore because it had already become part of who I was. When financial gaps appeared, I filled them without discussion. When plans needed support, I provided it without resistance. When Brianna needed stability, everyone quietly understood that I would be the one to make it happen. I stopped asking for recognition because wanting credit felt childish for something that had turned into an obligation. I stopped sharing frustration because it created tension I was later expected to resolve. I learned how to work in silence, to give quietly, to move through pressure without showing how much it truly cost me. By the time I was grown, sacrifice no longer felt like a choice. It felt like a permanent role stitched into every part of how our family worked. I supported without being seen. I provided without being thanked. I adjusted myself without being asked because that was the only way I knew how to keep everything stable, and slowly without remembering the exact moment it happened. I stopped believing that I deserved to be cared for in the same way I cared for everyone else. 2 weeks before everything collapsed, the atmosphere inside my family shifted in a way that felt almost cheerful at first, as if something new and hopeful had entered our world before I was ready to question it. Brianna announced that she was getting married. And for a brief moment, I felt genuine happiness for her because I believed she had finally found something stable, something that could give her direction, something that might reduce the pressure resting on our family. I congratulated her without hesitation, without realizing that the moment would quickly turn into an unspoken responsibility placed quietly onto my shoulders. Mom and Dad moved into planning mode almost immediately, and their excitement carried with it a familiar expectation that I would cover most of the expenses without resistance. At first, everything felt gentle, filled with conversations about venues, decorations, guest lists, and how important it was that everything appeared perfect so no one would judge our family. I nodded through those conversations, not because I fully agreed, but because I believed that protecting harmony inside the family was still my responsibility. In the beginning, the numbers appeared reasonable, heavy, but manageable. So, I told myself this was temporary, that a family event deserved support, that I should feel proud to contribute. I wanted to believe that paying for things was a form of love. And I wanted to believe that love would eventually return to me in a way I could actually feel. The first cracks appeared quietly. Each new list of expenses arrived faster than the last. Longer, more detailed, less practical. A simple venue became a luxury hall. A modest dress became a custom designer piece. Flowers stopped being just flowers and turned into imported arrangements that cost more than my monthly living expenses. I started to feel confused. Yet, I forced myself to stay silent because questioning it felt like betrayal. I continued to agree to the payments because I convinced myself this was the final stretch, that after the wedding, everything would stabilize, that my role as the one holding everything together would slowly fade into something healthier. I kept telling myself that sometimes a family needs one person to carry the weight so everyone else can breathe. And I had done it for so long that stopping now felt unnatural. However, the requests began to change in tone. They stopped sounding like needs and started sounding like expectations. Brianna began sending message after message, listing things that had nothing to do with comfort or necessity and everything to do with image and status. Each new demand felt less like a celebration of love and more like a test of how much I was willing to give up before I finally broke. Something inside me started to shift. I did not accuse anyone. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply began to wonder whether the word family in my world had slowly turned into another word for obligation instead of care. Even then, I still transferred the money. I still approved the plans. I still told myself that this was what a good daughter was supposed to do. I kept my doubts to myself because silence had always felt safer than confrontation. I kept sending money because peace was always valued more than truth. I kept smiling through conversations because breaking the pattern felt more frightening than continuing it. By the end of that week, the sense that something was wrong no longer stayed quietly in the background. It began to live inside my chest, steady and heavy, waiting for the moment when I would finally be unable to ignore it anymore. A few days later, my body stopped giving me quiet warnings and started forcing me to listen. The pain came without drama, without noise. Just a deep pressure that made it hard to breathe in a normal way. My boyfriend Daniel was the one who first noticed that something was wrong. Not because I complained, but because my movements slowed and my hands began shaking when I tried to hold a glass of water. He drove me to the hospital without turning it into a conversation. I sat in the passenger seat trying to steady my thoughts while he focused on the road. His jaw tight, his presence calm in a way that made me feel less alone without needing words from him. I did not think about weddings or money in that moment. I only thought about staying awake long enough to understand what was happening. Dr. Samuel Wright walked into the room with a calm voice and a serious expression that did not feel cruel, only honest. He explained the condition slowly, using language that did not try to scare me, but did not soften the truth either. He said the surgery was not optional. He said delaying it would be dangerous. He said the kind of financial planning required for this was not something to treat casually. His words settled in my chest with a quiet finality that felt heavier than the pain. I did not cry. I did not panic. I only nodded because there was nothing to debate. A few hours later, after paperwork and tests, I sat alone in the parking lot and called Mom and Dad. I told them the truth. I told them the surgery was scheduled for the weekend. I told them I was scared but steady and that I needed them to at least understand the seriousness of it. Mom's voice was soft, almost distant. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped I would be strong. Then she paused before shifting the conversation back to wedding arrangements and started asking if I had sent the additional payment to the venue. The speed of that transition felt unreal, as if the word surgery had only passed through her ears without stopping anywhere real. Dad's voice came next. He did not ask about my condition. He did not ask what the doctor said. He said that big events required sacrifice and that weddings could not be disrupted for personal problems. He said, "You should set your situation aside so her plans do not fall apart." The way he described my health made it sound small, as if it was an inconvenience instead of a threat. That was the first moment I felt something in me shift without breaking. I told them I could not send any more money. I said the funds I had were needed for the hospital. I said there would be no exceptions. My voice did not rise, but it did not shake either. I was not angry. I was precise. Silence followed. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that feels like the air has been pulled out of a room. After the call, I sat in my car with Daniel still beside me. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to draw a line that I had never drawn before. I did not know what it would cost me in the days to come. But I knew that if I crossed that line again, I would lose something far more important than money. 2 days after I told them about my surgery, my phone vibrated in a way that felt heavier than an ordinary message. I had just finished organizing medical paperwork when Brianna's name appeared on the screen. The message was short, clean, and careless in the way only deliberate things can be. She wrote that the wedding would take place on the exact same weekend. There was no hesitation in the words, no apology, no explanation, only a confident announcement, as if she were sharing good news instead of pressing on an open wound. For a few seconds, I stared at the screen, not because I did not understand, but because I did not want to accept how precise her timing was. I called Mom without thinking too much about the tone I would use. I asked her if it was true. I asked her if they knew what that date meant to me. Her voice did not rise or fall. It stayed steady in the way people sound when they have already made a decision. She told me it was confirmed that everything had been booked, that guests had been notified, and that it would be selfish to expect the plans to change so late. I felt something cold settle behind my chest. Not panic, not anger, just a quiet awareness. I told her I was not asking for the wedding to be cancelled. I told her I only wanted to know where they would be that day. The pause was brief, almost polite. Then she said they would be at the ceremony because that was where they were needed most. When I spoke to Dad later that evening, he was more direct. He did not circle around the truth or soften it. He said that weddings were irreplaceable milestones while medical procedures were things that could be endured privately. He said it made more sense for them to stand beside Brianna in a public celebration than sit quietly in a hospital waiting room. He did not raise his voice. He did not sound angry. He sounded final. That was when the last piece fell into place for me. I understood that the timing was not a coincidence. I understood that this was not carelessness or ignorance. I understood that Brianna had chosen the date after hearing about my surgery not before, and that it was never about convenience. It was about pressure. It was about control. It was about pushing me into a position where I would feel too small to protect myself. The strange part was that I did not feel the urge to argue. I did not feel the need to defend myself. I did not cry. I did not yell. I only felt tired in a very clear way, like a door closing inside me that I had been holding open for too many years. Daniel noticed that something had shifted in me before I said anything out loud. He did not ask questions that required answers. He did not offer advice that sounded like commands. He stayed close to me in the quietest way possible, sitting beside me, driving me to appointments, bringing me water when I forgot to drink. His presence was not loud, but it was steady. And in that steadiness, I felt more understood than I had in years. I did not announce any decisions that night. I did not threaten anyone. I did not send long messages. I let the truth sit with me in silence. I let the reality settle into my bones that I had been placed second again without hesitation. By the end of that day, I no longer questioned whether I mattered to them. I had my answer. I simply had not decided yet what I would do with it. One day before the wedding, I woke up with a strange, unfamiliar feeling sitting heavy inside my chest. A quiet sensation that did not feel like fear or panic, but something closer to finality that I had never experienced before. The heaviness that once lived in my body was gone, not because life had suddenly become easier, but because I had finally stopped forcing myself to carry everything alone without question or rest. I did not call anyone that morning yet. I did not hesitate for a single second either, because the truth was that my decision had already taken shape inside me long before the sun even touched the kitchen window. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at numbers that represented months of precious, invisible promises, silent sacrifices I had made without ever putting them into words. This time I did not see those numbers as something I owed or something that controlled me. I saw them as something I was finally allowed to touch, adjust, and release without fear or guilt. I started with the venue speaking in a controlled voice with steady fingers moving through the process with a calm that surprised even me. There was no anger in my tone, but there was no softness either, only a clarity that felt unfamiliar but necessary. I led the reservation, confirmed the withdrawal, and removed my name from the agreement without asking anyone for permission because I no longer believed I needed it. After that, I contacted the florist, then the catering team, then the sound company. Moving through each step without rushing, but without stopping. Each message remained short but intentional, carrying a quiet finality that felt heavier each time, not because of guilt, but because I was beginning to understand how deeply I had been buried inside decisions that had never truly belonged to me. The refund notifications appeared slowly, one by one, each one more real than the last, and not all of them returned in full, because contracts do not care about emotion. I accepted the losses silently because this was no longer about money at all. It was about finally reclaiming control. Daniel stood quietly near the doorway, close enough to feel present, far enough to give me space. He did not move toward me, and he did not step away. His presence did not feel like pressure. It felt like stability that asked for nothing in return. As the afternoon passed, my phone began vibrating more often with unknown numbers flashing briefly across the screen before disappearing again. I allowed every call to fall through without response because this was not the moment for explanations, apologies, or conversations that I was not ready to have. In the middle of that silence, I understood exactly what was happening without needing to be told. Vendors protect their own business first, which meant they stopped the moment instability appeared. Their systems were built to move fast, cancel quietly, and shift focus without emotion or hesitation. I did not send a message to Brianna. I did not warn Mom. I did not involve Dad. There was no speech, no confrontation, and no dramatic scene waiting to unfold. There was only silence. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt honest instead of dangerous. By the time the sun began to lower, my hands had stopped shaking. And that small detail surprised me more than anything else because my body had forgotten what real calm felt like for a very long time. My shoulders loosened gradually, and my breathing no longer felt like something I had to control second by second. Fear never arrived. Panic never appeared. Guilt did not take control. Instead, I felt stable in a way that did not require anyone's approval. Daniel eventually placed a glass of what? Beside my hand. He did not ask questions. He did not offer advice. He simply stayed close enough to remind me without words that I was not alone. As night approached, the house remained still, but it did not feel empty. My phone stayed quiet because I did not reach for it. I did not search for reactions, and I did not look for chaos. I allowed everything to move forward without forcing myself to be part of it. What I did that day was not loud, and it was not cruel. It was something that simply had to happen. 4 years, I had held everything together by giving more than I had. On that day, I finally let things fall apart by giving nothing at all. And that choice felt stronger than anything I had done before. That night, I slept without explaining myself to anyone. On the morning of my surgery, time felt strangely suspended as my world narrowed down to quiet movements and careful breaths. I was being guided through white hospital corridors while the wheels beneath my bed rolled in a slow, steady rhythm that felt more real than the fear I thought I might feel. The nurses spoke in low professional voices, checked my wristband, adjusted the thin blanket over my chest, and prepared me for a moment that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations. Daniel remained beside me until the last possible second, saying nothing, offering no advice, only placing his hand lightly around mine with a presence that felt steady without demanding anything from me. At the very same hour, The wedding hall that was supposed to celebrate Brianna began to reveal how fragile her control had always been. She arrived expecting music flowers, lighting, sound equipment, and a polished stage that she had described to everyone with pride. Instead, she walked into a half-empty space with bare floors, silent corners, and rows of chairs that looked unfinished and misplaced. At first, she laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a timing delay. But that laugh faded quickly when no staff appeared, no boxes arrived, and no music started. Brianna's reaction shifted from confusion to visible panic. Her hands tightened around her phone as she tried calling vendors who no longer answered. Her voice rose with every unanswered ring, moving from sharp questions to angry demands that no one in the room had the power to solve. She paced across the hall, her face tight, her breathing shallow, incapable of accepting that the perfect image she had planned was dissolving in front of her. Mom reacted differently. At first, she tried to keep appearances, greeting guests with forced smiles, telling them there must have been a technical mistake. As minutes passed, her smile began to crack. She pulled Brianna aside repeatedly, whispering urgently, trying to calm her while clearly not understanding what had happened. Dad moved restlessly near the entrance, calling people he thought could fix the situation, promising solutions he could not actually provide. They both looked lost in a space where they had always expected things to be taken care of quietly by me. Guests started to feel the tension long before anything was explained. Some stood up slowly and looked around with growing discomfort. Some exchanged confused glances and hushed conversations. A few tried to console Mom, but most began to drift toward the exit in small, uncertain groups. The longer the silence lasted, the less willing anyone felt to stay. The room shifted from celebration to embarrassment to quiet judgment without anyone needing to say it out loud. Ethan, my sister's husband, recognized the failure of the ceremony, not through anger, but through quiet observation. He noticed the missing elements, the tent staff, the guests slowly drifting away, and the way Brianna spoke to everyone with desperation rather than sincerity. He did not confront her in front of the crowd, and he did not force an explanation in public. He simply stood there watching the collapse of the wedding as his expression slowly shifted from confusion to disappointment. Back at the hospital, my body was being prepared for surgery without noise, without drama, without an audience. I heard the soft sound of gloves being adjusted, of equipment being positioned, of calm instructions passed between nurses and doctors. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, no urge to imagine what was happening elsewhere. My thoughts had become quiet and focused on staying alive rather than staying useful. At the wedding hall, the collapse reached its final stage. More guests left. Some shook their heads politely. Some avoided looking at Brianna directly. A few openly whispered to each other without even trying to hide their disappointment. The room slowly emptied, leaving behind unfinished decorations, confused family members, and a bride who could not command the situation no matter how loudly she spoke. I did not witness any of it. I did not need to. My world had reduced itself to inhaling slowly, exhaling carefully, and accepting that survival required more honesty than sacrifice. As the doors of the operating room began to close behind me, I felt lighter. Not because everything was suddenly easy, but because for the first time in years, I was not the one holding everyone else together while breaking myself apart. 2 weeks later, my life looked nothing like it once had, not because something miraculous had happened, but because I had finally stopped trying to rescue people who never planned to protect me. The first thing I learned without needing to see it myself was that Ethan did not stay. The paperwork moved quietly through the court system after he realized the full extent of Brianna's manipulation, not only toward me, but toward him as well. He did not shout, create public scenes, or drag the process through bitterness. He simply walked away from a life that had been built on performance instead of truth, choosing distance over damage. My parents did not collapse dramatically, but their world narrowed in ways they could not ignore. Without my financial support, their comfortable habits turned into careful calculations. Vacations became memories instead of plans. Shopping changed from impulse to hesitation. They learned what it meant to adjust without someone silently preventing the consequences of their choices. They tried to reach me more than once, not with apologies, but with confusion, as if they expected me to return the way the tide returns without question. I did not respond. Cutting contact did not feel like rage or revenge. It felt like air moving through a room that had been locked for too long. I changed my number. I moved my work files. I stopped explaining myself. For the first time, I was not waiting to be needed. And the absence of that role made my life quieter, steadier, clearer. Daniel never tried to push me toward ideas of closure or forgiveness. He stayed beside me in a way that never felt loud, never felt forced, never felt heavy. One evening, while we sat in a small park with nothing dramatic in the air, he asked me to marry him. There was no grand speech or public display, just honesty in his voice, warmth in his eyes, and the kind of calm that feels like safety instead of obligation. I said yes without fear. Our wedding was not large. It was not built to impress anyone. There were no expectations to meet no image, to maintain no pressure to perform. It was held in a simple garden with a small group of people who understood silence, respect, and boundaries. I wore a dress that felt like myself, not a costume for approval. Daniel stood beside me without needing to prove anything to anyone. And for the first time, partnership felt real. The lesson I carried from everything was not about revenge, shame, or victory. It was about learning that love does not require self-destruction, that loyalty without respect slowly turns into self-abandonment, and that protecting your own boundaries is not cruelty, but survival. I understood that people who only value what you give will never value who you are, and that walking away is sometimes the most honest form of strength a person can choose. Thank you for staying with me through this story from beginning to end, because these moments are not just mine. They are reflections of choices many people face in silence. If this story connected with you in any way, I would really like to know your thoughts, your experiences, or your perspective. Feel free to share in the comments because your voice matters more than you might think.